What's up, everybody, and welcome to Painting with the Black Bob Ross. Now, last episode we focused on freestyling, and I think that's a good theme that we should continue on for the next couple of episodes, just so that way we can have our feet wet and be able to create something out of nothing from just our imagination, from just our heads. Now, we are focusing more on landscapes and sceneries at the moment, but we will get to characters and different compositions soon, maybe even abstract, who knows. We don't want to limit ourselves, and I think that'd be a wonderful experience to do in the future. All right, so let's get to it. All right, so let's get started. Now, you'll notice that I have a canvas that already has some paint on it that's been there for a little while. I actually found this canvas in my giant library of unfinished work over here, and I think now is a good time to show that no matter what you have on previously underneath, that you can create something completely different, something completely new and fresh. You can take a canvas from anywhere, and as long as this area is dry and we're using acrylic paint, we can just cover whatever is on top of this or whatever is underneath and just do something completely new and different. So I'm going to just start off with my handy dandy 1.5 inch brush, and I think I'm going to lighten up this sky a bit by just taking some white paint, mixing it with a little bit of blue. Let's make the sky a little bit brighter. And all I'm doing is just taking my brush and moving it back and forth from one side of the canvas to the other side. Running a little bit low on white paint, but that's okay. As you can see already, there's a huge difference between what was there before and what is there now. And another thing that I'm doing is, instead of just going straight across back and forth, I'm just swooshing at an angle, kind of like a smiley face, and just working what I got down, instead of just focusing on side to side. I'm actually just scooping that brush downward a bit, just to give that sky a different direction. Just like that. I can even go back with some plain blue, some light blue. And if you're wondering the exact shade I'm using for this particular sky, I'm using primary blue. There's a difference between primary blue and phthalo blue. Primary blue has more of that electric, light blue, that neon blue, as opposed to phthalo, which gives you more of a darker tone, a much richer tone than the vibrant primary blue. And already I have a sky, and even right now I can just delegate this as to some water, but I think I want a different color for my water, something a little bit deeper. And so I'm going to dip into now that phthalo blue, which I was talking about before. Very, very deep and rich blue color. Maybe even mix it with some of that primary blue. And I'm actually using leftover paint from another project that I did before. I always like to use up as much as what I got already before I, renew my repertoire. And it's always good to use up all the materials that you have at once instead of, just tossing it away even though you have some leftovers. It's always good to just use up everything. Don't let anything go to waste. Just working that color back and forth. Now, it doesn't have to follow this smiley face motion. If anything, it can go straight across and still be okay. And I think I'm going to start dipping into that primary blue, but I'm going to leave it dark. Now the trick is I want it to be dark at the top and then just get gradually lighter as we reach the bottom. So I can add some white paint to my brush and just start lightening up the bottom. Bringing in that color from the bottom up, just so that way we have a nice gradation. I think I'm going to need to reload on some white paint. So let's go ahead and add some more. When I tell you I used up a lot of this paint for a previous project, and oh man, I really go through a lot of that white paint, especially since that white paint is very useful. Between all the colors that I use, white and black are by far the most heavily used colors in my entire repertoire, rainbow if you will, of colors that I have. Two mostly used things are black and white, ironically. So now that I have my water lightening up as it gets closer to the bottom, I think it's now time to work on our beach. And I think I want to add a beach in this painting. I think that'd be a nice touch. So I'm going to grab my first plate to mix an individual color on. I'm going to clean off this brush a bit. Now, as you can see, I have absolutely no brown in this very, very beat up palette of paint. And whenever you do not have a color, of course you want to mix. And so I'm going to take a nice big scoop of yellow paint, a nice scoop of red paint, and then I'm going to take some blue paint. And you guessed it, when you mix all three primary colors together, you start to get a brown. However, this brown is very, very dark. So of course I'm going to go in, add some white paint. I'm going to add some white paint. And just a little bit of yellow, just to promote that sandy color. There we go. That's what I want. And then I'm going to take that color, I'm going to start right at the bottom, and then bring it up into the water. And now this is a very, very crucial step, and I'll get to that later. You want that fade between that blue into this brown. And this is a very, very crucial step when you want to make a beach painting, a beach landscape, if you will. And I'll get into a little bit more detail later on as to why we need this blend, as to why this blend is just so very crucial for the next step. I think for now, I'm not going to do anything else to this part here. I think I might want to just clean up this edge. I'm just going to take my smaller 1-inch brush to do so, just to clean up this edge a bit, that horizon line. And instead of just Scooping down, I'm just going to go straight across. And the best way to get a nice clean horizon line is to always just pull that brush straight across. You don't want to pick that brush up too many times mid-stroke. You just want to start from one side, make sure your brush goes all the way to the other side, and then bring it back. And that's how you get that nice, clean, straight edge every time. I think I just want to darken that up a little bit. There we go, just like that. Now that I have my water to where I'm satisfied with, I think the next thing I want to do is just work back into my sky. You know, there are a couple of ways of making clouds, and instead of using my fingers or a fan brush, I'm going to show you a nice, quick and easy method using nothing other than just a balled up paper towel. Now if you take your paper towel, add a little bit of paint to it, and you just dab on the canvas, starting off very, very thick and heavy and just lightening up later on. In the end, you get a nice puffy cloud with a nice puffy texture without even getting your hands dirty. You just keep patting it out until the paint smooths itself out. Or you can leave it crumpled up and have some paint sticking off to give your clouds more of a three-dimensional texture. It's completely up to you. But all I'm doing is taking my brush or my paper towel, which is going to act as my brush for now, and I'm just taking my paper towel and just tapping. And I'm starting off very, very thick first, and then I'm lightening up as I get towards that edge. And of course, if the paint is still wet underneath, you really start to blend in that color on top. And instead of getting a pure white cloud, you get a nice blended in cloud. Now I can add more white paint to that to make it stand out more. And all I'm doing is just tapping that paper towel until everything comes together, just like that. As you see now, we have two big clouds in the sky by just using a balled up paper towel and some white paint. Now if you want more detailed clouds, more clear clouds or nice crisp edges on the clouds, I like taking this rounded head brush and just doing the same tapping motion. However, the best part about using brushes like these is that you get a similar texture as the paper towels. It's a little bit more crisp, but you're able to do much smaller peaks and valleys in our clouds and have it a little bit sharper than, say, what the paper towel is capable of doing. So I can even add on to that cloud just to make it a little bit sharper. And same thing with this one. So there are perks and benefits and deficits to whatever material you use. And it's all just a matter of how you use them together to get the desired effect. So now we have some clouds in our sky. And I think I want to add one more, actually. I'll have one peeking from behind the other cloud. And what I like to do is, to make it look like it's behind the other cloud, I just make sure that it's a little bit more faded than the cloud that's in front of it, And I make sure that I don't overlap too much. I leave some space in between the two clouds. Even take my finger and dab up some of that extra paint, just that way this cloud looks like it's coming from behind. And then even taking more white paint and really highlighting that cloud that's in front towards the edge. Now if you really want your clouds to stand out, what you can do is take some white paint, especially when these clouds are close to drying, and just add that pure white just towards the edge, nowhere else. Let the other edges of those clouds remain dark, just like that. Now the next thing I want to do, I'm going to put that brush back in the water. I think I'm going to grab my nice square brush, my really small square brush. Now, this is one of my favorite brushes because not only is it nice and square, but it has an angle to it. And the bristles are very, very sharp. And they give me a nice clean edge every time. So I think it's time for us to add some land in our backgrounds. I never have a horizon line with no land. That's just me, but if you don't want any land in your background, of course, this is your world. You can do whatever you want to it. So first I'm going to start off with just a line going across my horizon. I think I'm going to just leave it from there to there. And the best way to make sure your lines are straight, just make sure you're just pulling that brush to the side. And no matter how thick your line gets, it doesn't matter. You can always finesse it later. And so I'm just going to take more black paint, and I'm going to create some hills. And so you can either just wiggle your brush like so until you meet that edge and then color it in. Or you can take your brush and, similar to how we did the clouds, and just dab it on. Gives it that more grassy texture, which I think I like more than, say, the traditional mountainscape. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, just tap it out, giving it those nice frayed edges instead of just the rocky formation. And it gives the illusion that there's some trees over here in the background. It's not just a rocky flat land. And now, the next thing I want to do is just leave this land alone for now. And I'm going to create some details in my water. So I'm going to go back to that round brush first that we were using before. The same thing that we used for our clouds. And I'm going to take some white paint, but I'm going to water it down a lot, actually. So I have white paint in a plate, and I'm just watering it down. And it's okay if your water makes the paint, have a bit of a tint to it. It's okay. That paint is going to show up on the whiter side once it's dry anyway, and it'll all work out in the end. But what I want to do with this watered down paint, and you don't want it too watered down to where if I press on the canvas, it'll drip. So you want to be really careful with how watered down that paint is, but also to avoid that drip, you can take your brush, put it against the side of the plate and just scrape it. Or your palette and just scrape it. And what I'm doing is I'm going to create some waves. And what I like to do is just take that brush while this paint is still on the wetter side, because then I can work with it later on, and kind of gives us a draft as to how we want these waves to look. I'm just taking my brush and just wiggling that brush every so crazy, ever so crazy, and just letting the brush do all that work for me to create those waves, and tapping my brush as I'm going along as well. And you'll notice the reason as to why we have that gradation is because with that gradation, it now looks like the water is transparent when it reaches the shore. So that's why that step was really important, to have that blend in the background. So we have that cool, clear water look to it. And if you don't like just patting your brush down, of course, just like the clouds, we can always use that paper towel and just take what we got and just tap it out. It gives a nice wave effect as well. Now, I like working with these waves and whatnot first while that paint is still wet in the background, just so that way, if I'm not satisfied with it, all I have to do is just brush back and forth and get rid of them. But it does come with a trade-off, if you will, because the wetter the paint in the background, the more it's going to blend. And if you want really crisp edges, of course, it's not going to happen if this paint is still wet underneath, unless you add a big heaping glob of white paint on top. And sometimes we don't want that because it takes forever to dry. And sometimes it's just not the effect that we want. So I just like to work with what I got so far, and if it blends, it blends. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It's okay. It's just water. It's a painting. And who knows, it might be a better effect than what we anticipated to begin with. That's one of the joys of painting, is that you never quite get exactly what you want, but sometimes you end up surprising yourself in the end, and it's a lot nicer than what you anticipated. And I think that's what makes this whole experience so fun and enjoyable. You know, just not having full control over everything, but being able to still create something very, very cool and unique and nice, just because, you know, there was just a imbalance in, you know, the moisture of the paint, or something, some sort of variable that just life just pushed your way, and you were just still able to finesse something out of it. Is just a really, really nice talent to have in its own. I think I'm going to add a couple more waves going out into the water. Some small waves, some small crashes. Nothing too crazy, nothing too heavy. And then I'm just going to add some dashes over here. Now, to do these dashes, I say the best way to go about it is to make sure that you are brushing very lightly. Now, you can see I have very heavy strokes on my water, and that's okay because I can always go backwards with some blue and just mute out that color. Just really, really mute out that color. So it looks like I still have some highlights, like a reflection of a sun, and still have the waves on top. But as you can see, now that this paint is drying a little bit more, I'm able to take my brush and add those really, really bright whites to those waves that we've originally created, and just add some highlights to that sea foam. And then I'm still going to add just a few dashes here and there of plain white in the water. Even take some blue again. and work it out a bit. Just so that way it looks like our water is moving. I think I like what's going on with this water. Now I don't want it to be just a flat surface or a side to side. I'm actually taking my brush and moving my brush from one angle to the next, just to make it look like our water is moving a lot. Even going back in with some good old blue and darkening up some areas. Remember, if you're ever unsatisfied with any part, you can move into that older color, that previous color that was underneath, and just go back to that layer. All right, you're never confined to just one idea, and it is permanent and it's unworkable. There's no such thing. There's always a way to go back a step and figure things out from there, or even add something completely different that you didn't expect was going to work. I like looking at painting kind of like looking at a chess game. You anticipate a certain move, but sometimes the move happens that you're not anticipating, and you have to work around that move. And I find that to have a lot of relevance towards painting as well. Sometimes you make a move and a conclusion pops up that you do not expect, but the key is not to panic. The key is just to work around it. Try to figure out something else that might work, rather than just trying to stick to that one move that you got that didn't necessarily work out. Sometimes it's good to think outside the box and react to it, rather than just panic and start over. Just keep going, keep playing that game, and you never know what you might find. You might find a completely different solution and learn in the process. So I say never give up on the painting, even if you're starting to become frustrated or dissatisfied from it. It's always good to take that nice step back, look at the whole picture plane, and see what you can potentially add that might make things work for you. But there's never a moment in which you want to just take this thing and just chuck it. All right? So I digress, but I think I'm satisfied with what I got going on, especially with my water, and I'm just going to leave that water alone for now. And I think I want to add some detail to my land. And the best way to go about doing this is just mixing a nice green color. Now, shout outs to Sesame Street. I'm only on the first season, but apparently blue and yellow make green. I know, right? It's crazy. Blue and yellow make green. And so I'm going to mix those two together, get a nice green, and I'm going to add a little bit of black to that, so it's a nice dark green. And instead of mixing directly on, what I like to do is put the black on the side and just absorb little by little. So that way I'm able to keep the original color that I made in case I want to use that later. It's always good to separate the two different shades, just so you can go back to one shade later on and add it on later in case you want or need it. And then I'm going to take some white and do the same thing I did on one side but to the other. So I have a lighter green, maybe add a little bit of yellow to it, brighten it up. So now I have a slightly lighter green, a very vibrant green, and then a dark green. And I'm going to clean off that brush. Now you can use this brush, the nice square tipped brush. However, what I like to do is, instead of loading the paint like so, I like to just tap the paint on the brush and then poke at my land. And it's really, really hard to see right now because of how dark that color is. But I'm just getting a good amount of that land. I'm not covering up all the black. I want some of that black to still be at the bottom. But I'm covering a decent amount with this color first. And even if it doesn't show, that's okay, because we need this foundation in order for us to blend the next two shades anyway. And so now I'm going to move on and dip into that next green, and I'm just going to tap. I'm going to tap a lot less frequently and closer to my edge. And I'm putting a lesser amount of that green on each hill and making sure that it's close to the very edge of the hills. And then finally that lighter green, I'm just going to go at the very edge, just sponge it on with that brush. And I like to just sponge it on that way directly, just dead on, only because it gives that nice leafy texture. For our background, and yeah, no, it just works out the best. It separates all the bristles, you get those individual dots, and I love to get those small tiny details where you have to be really, really close to notice. Really brings that eye into the painting. I just find it very nice. I think I'm going to go one step brighter. So once again, I'm adding that white and that yellow and a little bit of that blue, just so we get some really, really nice bright highlights in these areas. And of course I'm going much smaller now, using the corner of that brush just to get the caps of the trees that are in this forest area. Now if you feel like this is just way too strong, you can switch over to your finger and just tap it out, and it'll help blend a little bit more. Just in case you feel as though like the green is just a bit too strong and you don't want that bright of a highlight, you can always take your finger while you're applying that paint and just poke. And it'll still maintain a bit of that texture, but it would also help blend the edges out into that last shade of green that you made and placed into that land. Alright. Now I like that green that I added in here. I think that was a really nice touch. Instead of just, the black silhouette land in the background. That's not always the case, especially during daytime. You don't just see the silhouettes of the land, you see individual leaves. I think, that's a nice landscape in the back. And so I think I want to add a palm tree, but not the conventional, palm tree over here that's sticking out or going back and forth, or maybe I might, who knows. Actually, I think a best way to decide whether or not we should put palm trees in this painting is to find a different opinion. So let's ask someone with a good opinion. Now, what do you think? Do you think that we should add a palm tree going from here up, or we should have a palm tree going down. What do you think? Good answer. I think I know exactly what we should do. All right. So, I think I should add in a tree coming from here, going out, and just having the leaves come out like that. I think that'd be a nice touch. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of my pointier brushes. Now this brush is nice and pointy. And one thing that you want to do is just make sure that whenever you're loading up your brush, I'm just going to take some black paint for now, just to work as my foundation. Whenever you load up that brush, you want to take your paint, twist it in a separate area of your paint where there's no paint on that plate, so that you get a nice fine point, a nice fine edge. And so I think I want to add my tree from here. I think I want to add my tree from here and bring it up and across. I think that'd be a nice touch. So let's take my brush with some black paint. Let's have my tree coming off from the side. And the best way, of course, to get a nice crisp line is to make sure that you do it in one decent stroke. You don't want to chop it up too many times, because then you'll get a choppy line. The best way to do it is try to get it in one good stroke, starting very heavy towards the bottom and just lightening up that pressure on that brush when you get towards the top. All right. I think that looks nice so far. So the next thing I want to do is take my brush and start adding in our leaves. And the best way to do that is I like to start off with just a dot first. And then I'm going to take my brush, get really, really close, and just take my brush and pull down, like so. Then I'm going to pull in the other direction. And then I'm going to make another line going up and above that last one, and maybe one line that goes this way. So we should have our crazy spider looking thing up top. That's okay. The next thing we want to do is take our brush and press down and flick. And the best way to go about this step is to flick in the direction of your tree. Each one of those branches, you're flicking in the direction of it and getting closer and smaller as you're going along, and close to that edge. Similar to making a feather. I'm going to use a smaller brush just so I can get in there and add a nice heavier point. There we go. That's what I needed. And it's all on that flick in the end. Add some more paint. And so for this one, of course, I'm following the direction of my tree and just flicking that brush out, getting skinnier and shorter as I get close to that edge. All right. Where's that thick brush? There it is. All right, and so now I'm just going to make them a bit thicker. And then just finish the rest of my tree. Now it's very important that you follow the direction of your tree branches, so that way even if they overlap you can tell which group of leaves belong where. And you can even highlight later on, which is what we're going to do. Highlight later on just so that way we know which trees, I keep saying trees instead of branches, which branches belongs where, which leaves belong to which branches. Alright. Then I'm going to go back to that smaller brush again, just so I can get those nice pointed edges. And sometimes that bigger brush tends to fray a bit more because the bristles are looser and not give me that nice fine point that I like when I'm making my palm trees. That's okay, because we can always mix and move back and forth and find the tool that does the precise job. See, now the small brush doesn't make big leaves, but it gives me that nice point. So sometimes just have to use a mixture of the two. But that's the beauty of teamwork. Just using the strengths of both brushes to give you the desired effect. That's all we're doing here. So now I have a nice palm tree in the middle of my beach scenery. And so I'm going to start highlighting areas. Just like how I did the land before, I'm going to actually highlight my leaves first before I do anything else. So I'm going to take that green and just go right on top of the black that I made. Just highlight each individual leaf. Now it doesn't have to show right away. We just want some of that dark green there first. Now sometimes the black is really, really strong and doesn't want that green to show through, and I think that's fine. You know, let that green show wherever it wants to show. Sometimes you get nice and bright leaves, sometimes you get some dark leaves, but that's not a defiance of nature. You know, in nature we do have some very, very dark leaves, or we have some shadows underneath, and then we sometimes have some light leaves as well that really reflect some light. So it's okay if you have some dark areas, some light areas, some medium green areas. I just like to work with what the painting gives me. And then I'm going to switch over to that really, really light green that I made earlier and just add in those highlights at the very edges of each leaf. This is what's really going to make things look crazy three-dimensional. There's just those highlights in the end. I think I'm only going to do one side of each one of these palm branches instead of doing both. And then, of course, highlighting the individual branch that holds these leaves. I'm just adding a little bit of that light green to the tops of these leaves. I'm really starting to like how this turns out. With that highlight on top. It really just pushes everything to like the next stage. Just gonna keep adding more and more lighter green to only one side, just so that way we have some bright leaves and then some dark leaves on the other side. A nice contrast. Some highlights and then shadows. I like what I got going on here. And so I think it's time for me to work amongst my trunk of my palm tree. And I'm going to go back into that light brown. Now I've mixed a lot of it, however, because I spread out that paint so much, a lot of it is dry. But that's okay. I just have just enough for me to work with. I'm just using a really, really small SpongeBob brush. Now, for those of you who know me, know that I love referencing SpongeBob. And the reason why I call this the SpongeBob brush is just like that one episode where they had to paint Mr. Krabs' house, and SpongeBob takes a paintbrush because he's very, very scared to touch Mr. Krabs', I think it was his first dollar, that he takes the brush, sticks it in his nose, and gets only one hair. And so I call this my SpongeBob brush because it looks like that brush from the episode. But if you have any sort of SpongeBob references, or want to talk about your favorite SpongeBob episode, feel free to put that in the comment section down below. One of my favorite things about SpongeBob is just it created such a huge meme culture where everybody relates, and all these pictures are just so funny. It's like every single episode in SpongeBob relates to real life somehow, or something crazy that we all can relate to, even as adults. And it's funny, you know, what people create and come up with just by these small frames in the episode. It's just, you know, really, really funny. A really cool, like, I guess, community of people that create these things through somebody else's work, and I guess provides a different level of enjoyment when it comes to that show. And what I'm doing in my trees, I'm just cross-hatching. I'm not really following any rules when it comes to the palm tree. I'm just cross-hatching back and forth, kind of in an X motion, but a curved X motion, to show the curvature of the tree. I'm just adding on layer by layer. Now, there's probably a much more accurate way of emulating a palm tree trunk, but quite frankly, I don't live anywhere nearby any place that has a palm tree anywhere. I mean, if I find a palm tree in New York, there's probably a problem. Um, and even in my travels, I never really come across a full palm tree before, a fully grown palm tree. So this is my best guess. Or if I did see a palm tree, it'd be so far away that I couldn't even see the details in the trunk to begin with. But sometimes you just gotta go with your imagination, what you think it might look like, and go with your own interpretation sometimes. That's okay. Or, because we do live in the year 2020, we can probably just Google it at this point, but ain't nobody got time for that. At least not right now, so I just want to guess and figure it out as I go along. Maybe I'll just make up my own kind of tree. Maybe this is not even a place on Earth. Who knows? This is your world that you're creating on the canvas, and there doesn't necessarily have to be any rules that needs to be followed. And so all I'm doing is taking a darker brown and just adding that in as well, closer towards the middle of the tree and the bottom of the tree, just so that we have a bit of a shadow. And then the last thing I think I want to add are a couple of birds. Now, I might have to get nice, close, and personal with you guys for this step, just because I want you to see how I do these birds. And so, what I like to do is, I like to start off with the classic two-line bird. But then I like to take my brush and just stroke, similar to how we did the palm tree branches, on either side, following each wing. And then I pull down in the middle. So it gives us a nice flying bird in the background. And then of course we can go back to our old school birds for the really, really small ones. Like that. But with everything said and done, I think this is where I'm going to pump the brakes, call it a day on this painting. And for those of you who have followed along and made something like this, or even did something different, I know I'm ready to just call it quits and throw in the towel. Sometimes the best thing when it comes to painting and drawing is just knowing when to get up and walk away from it. Not to say, give up, but to just get up and walk away from it, and just, if you want to come back and add more later, cool. But this looks very well done to me, and there's not much I can add onto it, or that I want to add onto it, that I couldn't put on a different episode later, quite frankly. So I'm satisfied with it. And for those who did follow along, don't forget to sign your paintings and post it on your Instagram and tag the Black Bob Ross on it, so that way I can see it and I can potentially share it, so that way our whole community can see it, because we'd love to see your work as well. Once again, I'd like to thank everybody who took the time out to watch this episode of The Joy of Painting, featuring me, the Black Bob Ross, and I hope to see you guys again soon. Peace.